So Tapan, welcome to RNT Fitness Radio. It's good to finally be able to do this.
Yes, and this has been a long time coming, and I'm really excited about this podcast.
Amazing. So take me back a couple of years. We're recording this on March 2022. Take me back 3 years then, and where you were in your life at that point, and what were some of the big, what were the series of moments that led to your ultimate trigger to think, right, enough's enough, I need to do something about this?
I think there's a number of things actually, and I think it goes back to probably my childhood. I think it's important to give you that background that, I was one of those very, very chubby, overweight kids, age 10, 11, very fat. And growing up in the culture I did, it wasn't considered a bad thing. I think my mum kind of liked my portly, chubby frame. But, even I didn't sort of really like it at that age. And it was actually my grandma, right at the beginning, who said, look, this is not a good look for a young boy to have, and she kind of encouraged me to be active. But probably from about 11 to my mid-40s, I was active. I tried to train and be in as good shape as I could, but I could never hit anything near the kind of physique that I really wanted. And by the end of it, I just assumed it was just genetically not possible.
Really? And what were you trying? What sort of things were you trying with or without success?
And I think that's a good point. I would read a lot, I was buying magazines. This is well before the internet, so this is in the days of sort of muscle and fitness magazines and men's health and all of that. And you try and assimilate some knowledge, a little knowledge, as you know, is a dangerous thing. But fundamentally it would be a mixture of cardio, probably a bit too much cardio, weights, but usually the same 5 or 6 exercises, and there was no structure to it. I think that's safe to say. Diet was always with good intention, but when you don't know enough about it, even though you intend to do things well, you let yourself down and you don't realise that. And little things like, I didn't understand the importance of the other activities you need to do in a day. This all came later when I joined you guys, but so back then, a typical Saturday, go to the gym, spend an hour, think I've done everything I need to, and then spend the rest of the day on the sofa watching sport, and so little surprised that I was actually making any gains. But I was one of those guys that could look okay in clothes.
Yeah.
I had a small frame, and if I kept to like that sort of skinny, fat physique that was the best I could achieve, I'd look okay in clothes. And as far as I was concerned, that's as good as it was going to get for me.
Who were you aspiring to? What were you aspiring to look like?
Listen, I don't think there's any one person, but you do. When you're a young man, you look around. Whether you go to the park and you see the guys, playing football with their tops off, or you go down to a beach or a pool, whatever, and you say, right, I'm not obese by any means, but man, I'm not taking my top off here, right? And I looked around and I thought, well, maybe it's just not in my genetics, and I blamed a whole bunch of stuff. What I hadn't ever done is actually seek, proper guidance from someone who knew what they were doing.
Yeah. What sort of other excuses did you have?
Say again.
What sort of other excuses did you have?
Sorry.
What sort of other excuses did you have?
Yeah, so many. I mean, the thing about the human mind is we're really good at excuses, and especially someone like me. So I enjoyed sport, don't get me wrong. I liked it. So when I was at university, I played very badly, but I played a bit of rugby, played a bit of cricket, a bit of hockey, and I enjoyed all that. I enjoyed the social. But my main excuse once I started working was, in my mind, time. And then, you find time for other stuff, but it was just scheduling it and all those sort of things. So I think a lack of knowledge and a lack of planning was probably what fundamentally was letting me down.
Yeah, and then at what point do you think, right, enough's enough? I've spent 25 plus years trying this thing. Something needs to change. What were some of the things that made you think, I'm going to do something about this now?
It's a good question. I think about 5 or 6 years ago, I joined a sort of high-end gym and had a trainer in the gym, and in those 1 or 2 months, I could see some real change. And that's the first time I thought, hey, maybe I'm capable of something here. The problem was I got injured around that time, slipped a disc in my lower back doing something. And by the time I recovered from that, I just slipped back into my old habits. I'm a social guy, and I used to enjoy certainly going out and eating and drinking and late nights on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all of those sort of things. So my habits certainly weren't great. I think the big breakthrough for me, Akash, if I'm honest, was I got COVID in really early on, about 2020 March. So it was one of the first, I got it before a time that the country knew what lockdown was.
Yeah.
And when I got it, my particular COVID was pretty severe. I had pneumonia, went to hospital briefly, but there were definitely 2 or 3 nights where, and without exaggerating, I thought I was going to die.
Really?
I couldn't breathe. And my worry was, because my breathing was so laboured, my worry was that I was just drift asleep and not wake up. And in fact, I do know that has happened to people subsequently. People describe that. So that was one wake-up call, that something has to change. The second is that a little bit like your father, I've been seeing your dad's progress. My dad's always been very fit. He's in his late 70s now, but always been able to help me with stuff. If I'm moving house, moving clinic, doing stuff, he's the first one to jump up and say, "Yeah, let me give you a hand." And I thought about it, and I thought, look, I'm only in my mid-40s. I don't know if I could do that level of activity in another 30 years. So suddenly, the big change for me was the change in motivation. I know you speak a lot about the why. And when my motivation was always cosmetic or vanity or short-term, either you meet that goal or you don't, but it doesn't matter. But suddenly it became about, I thought, I want to be able to do these same things for my kids, not in 5 years or 10 years, but even in 20 or 25 years. So once the goal became much longer term, once it became more important, I think that's when my whole behavior changed, and that's when I really wanted to find something that I could use for the long term, not just short term gains.
What was it like thinking you were going to die from COVID?
Well, I can honestly say it was the scariest sort of 3 days and nights of my life. I mean, the days weren't so bad, but at night it was, what do? You are breathing as hard as you can, but you think, if I just fall asleep, what if I don't wake up? So it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone, but there's a lot of people who I have spoken to who can relate to it. There's a number of people who got that. The best way I can explain it is, if you've ever gone swimming and you accidentally just go under the water when you weren't planning to, and you gulp a whole bunch of water and you've got to cough it out. It's unpleasant, but once you cough the water out, you're going to be fine. Well, this was feeling like that on air, that even taking too deep a breath could just set off a coughing fit or make you feel sick. So it was like breathing was difficult and uncomfortable, and it was like that for a long time. Unfortunately, when I got better, I kind of celebrated the fact that I had survived by just literally eating anything and everything I could get my hands on. I kind of almost went into this phase of, right, I deserve this. So if you remember lockdown early 2020, most of the country were in their own houses. I was eating too much of the wrong food. I was drinking a fair bit of alcohol quite early on in the day, which again then completely impairs your food choices. And as a result, I've always been around 72 to 75 kilos, but very rapidly I went right up to about 88.
Wow.
Which was immense for me. And what I did is, every time I couldn't fit into a set of clothes, I just got slightly bigger clothes out from my wardrobe. But it was that one fine day when I realised I was now in my baggiest pair of shorts, and even they weren't fitting me. The shops were shut. I thought, right, I don't have the option for bigger clothes. I need to now just actually do something about this. And that's the day when I actually joined the cohort of RNT that I did.
Wow. Wow, I didn't realise the gain in weight came literally, 17 kilos, what you reckon?
Well, so it was probably about 13 kilos. 13 to 15 kilos, but probably in about 2 months.
That's one hell of a celebration.
It was. And when you think about it, it was just from 10 o'clock in the morning and box sets, and I wasn't sleeping, I was staying up at night. All the things that a coach would probably faint at, I was doing. I had every bad habit going. So that was fundamentally my shortfall. To be fair, I knew I was doing it. I had a bit of insight, and I also knew I wasn't going to do it forever. And maybe that was something that saved me. But when my day came, I was dreading it. I could barely take a few steps without getting out of breath.
You said you were celebrating. What were you really feeling? Because to start drinking early on in the day, to start eating that much, you can't really be that much of a celebration.
No. I think celebration is probably a misplaced emotion. I think it was, well, first of all, there was nothing to do. Businesses were shut. My clinic was shut. There was no end in sight. If I think about it, it was probably a combination of boredom, frustration, a bit of anxiety about what's happening, relief at having got through the COVID. There were so many different things that played into it. And unfortunately, as anyone who's been in that position knows, once you start, it's very easy to carry on. And unless you have a good motivation to come out of it, that's exactly what will happen. You just carry on. So for me, knowing that at some stage I did want to get back into shape was strong, but it took a really big change for me. It was that realization that, hey, I don't actually have any clothes to wear, also, I don't know, I look back to think, was there any pivotal thing that started me? The RNT idea had flashed up a number of times, and that's when I thought one day, I'm going to bite the bullet, here I go, I'm going to pay my subscription, and I'm just going to start.
Why RNT?
Actually, it's a good question, and maybe I can say, I was thinking, probably not RNT. The idea that, first of all, you guys had some great social media posts, and I'd see a lot of transformations that you'd done. So, and of course, I don't think it's any big news that RNT has a lot of Asian clientele. And the reason that was relevant for me is because I'd had it in my mind that maybe people from my cultural background just are genetically indisposed and can't actually put on lean muscle. Maybe we just carry a certain amount of body fat. So when I saw people who I knew, I recognized some of those earlier adopters that you had, I thought there's got to be something here. But if there was one thing that put me off, and this was just my foolishness, it was that it had this virtual element to it. To me, I thought, how can that possibly work? If I don't have a physical trainer, someone who I meet in person who's guiding me, I don't see this working. So in fact, maybe one of the things that delayed me was the idea that I couldn't see how this could possibly work.
And you've had experiences with in-person personal training before.
Yeah.
What didn't work for you with that?
When I had a personal trainer? It worked, but it was very expensive. That's the first thing. And of course, there's no flexibility in the system, because if you have somebody, in the gym I went, they only had one time. I had to be there, I think, at like 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week. So it meant if I was traveling or if I wasn't around, I would just miss the session. Where of course, if you're in charge, you don't do your morning session, you do it in the evening. You don't do your Monday, you do it on a Tuesday. So I think the rigid aspect of it was one thing, and it was expensive, and it was okay for a short term, but it wasn't something I could continue long term.
Yeah, sure. So you had this realization moment of not having clothes.
Yeah.
You bit the bullet. Talk about that process of beginning the process. I mean, come off such a, I was going to say a luxurious time, but abusive time, effectively, to yourself. How did you find getting the ball rolling and building that early momentum?
I think initially there was excitement, and I think there's the excitement got me over the start line. The idea that I was taking control and I was finally just taking responsibility. So there was definitely excitement. It helped that the initial email I got from my coach was very positive, because I had a whole bunch of negativity. I'd sent in some photos. That was like a really embarrassing and very vulnerable moment, when part of the registration process was to take photos of yourself and send them in. Part of me was thinking, I can't do this, I don't want to send these photos in. But I thought, I always felt it like you guys were like the doctors almost, if I'm not going to be open and transparent about where I'm starting, what I want to achieve, you're not going to be able to do your bit. So when I sent them in, I half expected somebody to say, not for you, mate, you know, you're past it, I don't think there's much we can do. But when I got, in fact, the opposite, which was, right, let's get going. And I did say, you know, how long until I can see some results? And, you know, when I got an answer, you'll definitely see something in 4 weeks, I couldn't believe it. I thought, there's no way. But, so there was definitely that initial excitement. I had a bunch of things that went against me, and I had a bunch of things that were in my favour. The biggest thing in my favour was that we were in lockdown. So certainly when we started, I just had that 1 or 2 weeks in the initial clean the palate phase where I had to readjust, where I didn't have to balance work. But almost as soon as that finished, work started, so I had to do the two side by side.
Yeah, and then things are going against you? Or was that
I think when I look at the things going against me, first of all, I work very long hours, you know, and certainly then because we were opening up after the restrictions, the clinical work would take me a good, let's say, 10 hours a day, but then the admin and all the stuff that was going with it would easily take me 14 to 15 hours a day. So work hours was definitely one of them. I had been carrying an injury just in the January of that year, and I started with you guys in, I think, June. But in the January, I'd had some shoulder surgery. I'd already slipped a disc, as I mentioned, and I've had arthroscopies in both my knees and all the meniscus taken out. So I was also wary of what my body could and couldn't do. And that was probably the biggest thing against me, was the recovery from the COVID, the injuries, and the pressure of work.
Yeah, and how did you deal with the pressure of work? Because you're a busy entrepreneur, you travel a lot, you have clinics all day long. Just for the podcast, you were telling me how managing patient load is your biggest, I wouldn't say struggle, it's an amazing thing. But you're dealing with a lot of client work where it takes a lot of your hours of the day. How are you balancing nutrition, training, cardio, steps, and overall the planning and structure element, which you said was a big struggle in years before? How are you now implementing it into your day-to-day? Because I think that would be really useful for many of the listeners who are also high performers, who are very busy and time-strapped, juggling a lot of different priorities, and also a family.
Yeah, well, I think the first and foremost thing is, what I found really useful, and I'd recommend anyone to do this, is to actually listen to the podcasts that you did, because there were so many personal journeys on that. And I remember so many of those early podcasts that I used to listen to, because you could relate to something in almost every podcast, and in some of them I was like, that's my story, you know. So I remember, I think there was a chap who was either a pharmacist or he had high blood pressure and was told by a pharmacist that, you know, he had to go on medication for life or something, and, you know, I was listening to his story, and there was a few, and every time I heard something I learned a lesson from it. So in terms of what I implemented, balancing the work, the first thing I did is I knew I had to get my steps in. And that was a big realization for me. I didn't know how important steps were going to be. You know, it was only when my coach said, I need you to do, I think initially started with 12,500 or 15,000 steps a day. I thought, I couldn't relate to that. What does that mean? I'd never used a pedometer, I'd never used a watch that measured that. So I thought, is that what I'm already doing? When I realized that was probably closer to about 1,000 a day, you know, with the sedentary job that I do. I thought, right, I need to get these in. So I live about 5 miles from work. So I thought the first thing I'm going to do is walk there. That should cover it. Well, that only took me to about 7,000 or 8,000. So I realised now I've got to walk home as well. And, you know, that's an hour and a half walking in, an hour and a half walking back. And so my first non-negotiable was, whatever the weather, whether it's raining, whether it's cold, whether it's sunny, I'm going to walk. So I just made sure I had the kit to do that. You know, if it was like waterproofs or whatever, I said, I'm never going to use the tube until I've done this, you know, first part of the transformation. I will walk no matter what I have to do. That was the first thing. Luckily for me, Akash, I didn't have to travel in those first days. I suspect if I did, I'd have got derailed pretty easily, because not only had I not set my routine, but travel disrupts anything. So not traveling allowed me to at least establish a routine. And then I heard some really interesting things from a lot of your contributors. You know, there were people talking about the importance of being pedantic. They're saying, no amount of obsession is enough. Like if you are tracking your food, for instance, you need to weigh it. I mean, a few years ago, if somebody told me I'd be weighing my food, I'd have said, you must be joking, I'm not going to weigh my food. But I realised how erroneous I was with some of my portion sizes, for instance. So weighing the food, then one of the guys said, if I go on holiday, I recommend you take some body scales and some food scales with you. And when I listened to it, it didn't sound crazy to me, but I thought, can I actually do that? Can I go to a holiday resort with some food scales? But I did, and it's the best thing I did, because I managed to go on a holiday and not lose any of the momentum that I was building. The water was a big thing, and I just wasn't drinking enough water, so I just made sure that I built that into my day. Probably the biggest regret, well, not the regret, the mistake I made is I didn't involve people. I tried to do it on the secret. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I thought, let me see if I can just do it. I suspect at the time I wondered if some of my social circle or friends and family might not understand why I was doing what I was doing and might derail me, not with bad intention, but you know. So I kind of had to plan a lot of things, but again, I go back to it. My luck was lockdown meant that the restaurants hadn't opened, the bars hadn't opened, socialising was quite difficult, and that I think helped me out a lot on a personal level, because it meant that that temptation was taken away from me. And then it's quite easy, you know, the things that are easy for me, there's a gym in the building I live in, so I could just pop down to that. It was a very good gym. But for the first 3 months, it was closed. So, you know, this is what I say, when the coach wrote me my plan, I thought, how am I going to do this? I've got a set of dumbbells and a workout bench, that's it. And if I want to do cardio, it's a jog outside. I honestly thought this will never work. But it was amazing, just doing those simple dumbbell exercises in a tiny little spare room in my flat, and I could actually see the improvements in maybe about 3 or 4 weeks.
Amazing. And then how did you translate that initial motivation as things opened up, as things got back to normal, the bars are open, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights back on again?
Yeah.
How did that transition go?
One of the best things I did, and probably the thing that kept me on track the most, is booking the photo shoot.
Yeah.
Because I booked that with Shan, he's a very good friend of yours. And what he said quite early to me, he goes, look, lock it in, because it locks in your accountability. And that just made a lot of sense to me. What Sham said, he goes, if you lock in your photo shoot and you know you're going to be basically exposing yourself in front of a stranger for photos that, you know, may be seen in the public domain, you're going to be less tempted to go off track. And he was absolutely right. Yeah. You know, because as that day, I think I started with you guys in June.
Was it March or was it?
No, so I applied in March, but we didn't get going till June. Okay. Yeah, so it's mid-June. And the photo shoot was in October, so we had about 4 months. And yeah, that always kept me grounded, because I thought at some point this is going to be extremely scary. And what it meant is that as things were tweaked and as things were added, so exercises were added and calories were reduced and steps were increased, I didn't have a problem with it, because I thought I'm the one that's going to benefit from this. So, yeah.
Did you let your social circle in at this point?
No, actually, you know.
Or did you just send them a picture of you in your boxes after?
No. So I remember having one. I mean, this is probably quite useful for a lot of people. I remember the lengths I would go to. So we were having a bit of a reunion down in central London. And so the first thing I did is I called up the restaurant and asked to speak to the manager and said, listen, I'm doing this training and I'm just going to ask you, what's your menu and can you do some certain things for me or whatever. And he was only too keen to help, and that was really good. When I met the birthday boy on the day, I said, listen, I don't want to make a big deal of it because I just don't want to have peer pressure, but I'm just letting you know, I'm not drinking today. I'll have maybe a non-alcoholic beer or whatever, but after that, I just prefer not to have any pressure. And he was really good with it. But that's not always going to work, and subsequently, actually, there's obviously a bit of a journey after that first photo shoot and, a few slip-ups and whatever. So I think it's a constant learning process. I don't think anyone ever just gets to that point where it's always going to be perfect. But it's about understanding that there'll be great days, there'll be good days, there'll be the average days, and there'll be a couple of bad days. and you can't just lose your focus because you have the odd bad day or two. Sometimes that's just going to happen, and you deal with it.
Yeah, I think the chat you have with your friend is a very useful tip for many listeners, because that's sometimes it can be quite a scary thing to do, but once you have that first one, the second, third, fourth, fifth time you do it's a lot easier.
It is. I mean, I remember it's intimidating. You're walking into a bar of your best friends who are all holding a pint of lager, and so it's quite funny because I told the waiter to bring me a non-alcoholic beer, thinking he'd pour it at the bar and bring it, but no, he proceeded to pour it, at the table. I thought, this is brilliant. Everyone's going, but no one batted an eyelid. No one really noticed, because unfortunately, and it kind of. I think I read it in one of your books, or certainly one of your podcasts, and it's about picking your tribe. It's like if you constantly surround yourself with people who are not in your mindset, if your focus is now looking after your health, looking after your body, exercise, nutrition, but the 5 people you spend the most time with are not of that mindset, it can be very difficult. And sometimes, you have to be willing to prioritize and say, well, what's important for me? And I'm not talking about just abandoning entire social groups, but planning your socializing better so that you're not constantly derailed.
Yeah, you learn a lot by your circles, and it's one of the reasons why we put such a strong emphasis on community and cohorts.
Yeah.
Because for many people, they don't have those social circles that do care about their health and fitness.
Exactly.
So having that community here can be somewhat can replace that for the share.
Definitely. I think it's powerful, and I think that was one of the really strong things. There was always somebody posting something on the Facebook page, whatever. Subsequent to that, I started I was invited to a WhatsApp group by some of the guys as well, and it's really, really useful for just keeping you going and pushing that motivation.
Yeah. Talk about some of your travel tips, because your traveling it's not just leisure travel. You're doing a lot of business travel to all sorts of countries around Europe and around the world. Talk us through some travel tips that you use on flights and hotels and some of the hardest countries to be in. You're not just going to sort of New York.
Correct. Yeah.
No, places far remote places in Eastern Europe sometimes, which isn't always the easiest place to navigate.
Yeah. So I think there is no amount of planning that you can do that's enough. I mean, first and foremost, I think you have to almost sit down and almost in a meditative mood, imagine yourself at various parts of that trip. So for instance, I'll give you an example. The last trip I went to, the last one I went to was Dubai. Now, the old me would, and a lot of, the challenge for me is a lot of my work is corporate work. So what it means is that the longer flights tend to be more luxurious flights, but also there's a lot of entertainment and sort of dining laid on. So it takes a lot of focus, and as the first tip I give is that you've got to just sit there and work on your mindset, because if you just allow yourself to passively go on these things without the planning, you will find yourself derailing your efforts pretty quickly. So let's say last time I went to Dubai, you check in and you go into the lounge, for instance. Well, what do all lounges have? Free, champagne and wine and beers and whatever. And as a reflex, you can literally just walk over, pour a glass and sit down, because that's what you've done for the last 10 years. And instead, I'd already made my mind up, because I visualized it that morning, that once I go through security, when I get in there, bottle of water, and I'm then going to go down to the airport and find the healthiest food I can take on the plane with me. And I'm so glad I did, because when they served the food on the plane, it was a disaster. It was just very sort of, it didn't look particularly good, but it was, it would have just been complete waste of calories for me.
Yeah.
Declining the complimentary drinks on board. I know it sounds really boring and it sounds really, but actually, does it make a difference? I mean, this whole idea of, well, you're on a flight, so you must indulge in this, that, the other. Actually, it was probably one of the best flights I had, because when I got off on the other side, I'd had some great rest. I felt really clear-headed, not so muggy as I would have done. And what it also meant is that when I got to my hotel, I wasn't making silly choices. So previously, you know, if you've had a couple of drinks on the flight and you get to the hotel, more often than not, you can order some room service or whatever. But here I went very focused. Now, the second thing is, I found that a lot of the companies that make protein powders make them in sachets, which is a lot easier, because previously I was walking around with like the electrical mixer and you know,
really?
scale, you know, yeah, just to make it in my room.
Yeah.
But now, you know, I found these sachets which mix very easily, and they're just a godsend because in some places, you mentioned Eastern Europe, you know, it can be pretty difficult to find the kind of things that you always want to consistently, and it depends on how you're eating, what you're eating. Everyone's on a different diet plan. You know, you may know that I'm sort of got impaired glucose tolerance, so I'm sort of type 2 diabetic. So very high carbs just don't work very well for me. But in a lot of these countries, potatoes and wheat and pasta is the main staple of their diet. So whatever you can take with you that will allow you to stay on board with your nutrition is useful. I would always ring ahead and find out what kind of gym facilities they had. What was really frustrating in a lot of COVID is that they would shut the gyms, which I found, I know what your views on this were, you were very vocal, but I found that, you know, really frustrating. So then even now in some hotels they're still shut, so it's a question of packing enough stuff that you can to do at least a run or some form of workout in your hotel room. And then having that discipline, you know, it boils down to discipline. If you imagine 5 nights in a row you're walking into a banqueting room or something where the first thing you see is a bunch of waiters and waitresses with trays of drinks, you know, expecting you just to pick one up, and all your life that's what you've done, you've just picked up the first drink that you get, but knowing that it's a slippery slope after that. So for someone like me, I'm pretty all or nothing, and it's insight, I've recognised that. I don't necessarily have that discipline to be very balanced, so I prefer just to do the nothing. You know, it works for me. Other tips, I would say, I've realised the importance of sleep. You know, I'm not a great sleeper, and I think poor sleep can really impact your decision making as well, and I think that's the problem. I don't think any of us guys and girls who are on these journeys suffer from a lack of motivation. We don't suffer from a lack of dedication, but sometimes it's decision making gets impaired. And what are those things that impair the decisions is alcohol for sure, but also just fatigue or boredom. So I found for me sleep is important. So especially if you're traveling across multiple time zones, what I tend to do is the minute I get on the plane, I visualize myself being in the country that I'm going to. So for instance, you know, if it's midday here, but I'm going to, for argument's sake, India, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I behave like it's 5 o'clock on the plane. So 4 hours later, I'll try and go to sleep, you know. And so that minimizes a bit of, not completely, but it minimizes a bit of the sort of time zone jet lag disruption.
Yeah, because jet lag, sleep, all those things again contribute to poor decision making, and then it's a slippery slope from there. I think one thing I think you said that was really interesting was the whole reflex element of just picking up that glass.
That's it.
And rewiring that behaviour is probably one of the hardest things you do long after the photo shoot, because after the photo shoot there is no camera holding you accountable. It's back to life again.
Totally.
And I think it's then where it's like, can I just have one, or can I just not have any?
Yeah.
And how have you battled with that?
Well, not always successfully, if I'm honest. You know, in total honesty, you know, so one of the things I suffer from is I don't have an off switch when it comes to, let's say, snacks. So if you go to somebody's house and they've got, you know, crisps or peanuts, until I break, I'm really good. But once I have that first one, then it can, you know, subconsciously, you just find your left arm is just literally constantly dipping into the bowl and, you know, and popping, you know, a few peanuts into your mouth. So it really depends where I am in a particular journey. I mean, I have to say, over the last 4 to 6 months, there's been a few little disruptions in my regime, which I'm just getting back onto board now. I managed to get COVID for the second time in December, which did, start taking me down a familiar route again. But because I've been there before, because I recognised it, I could halt it in its tracks pretty
How did
quickly.
you catch it?
How did I catch it?
Yeah.
I think it was
not COVID. How did you catch your old behaviours? Because that's really tough.
Yeah. So if you imagine, I managed to get it just about 5 days before Christmas, and we were planning to have like a bit of a family, reunion with all the cousins and everything. So I was missing that. I was missing New Year's. I was going to isolate naturally on my own. So unfortunately, a degree of self-pity kicks in, which it shouldn't do, but it does. And you start, well, not you, but I start justifying behaviours like, well, it's Christmas. It's okay if I indulge for a few days. It's so unfair in many ways, the way the body works, that how just a few days, but consecutive days of overindulgence, it does two things. Not only does it derail you, but it starts allowing you to revisit old behaviours. So suddenly, things that you've managed to successfully avoid for a number of, weeks, months, years, or whatever, suddenly now become much more irresistible. So yeah, about 10 days of, I suppose, pretty. But then I was very sick as well, so it's not like I was going to be able to do anything. I tried to train as early as I could, but post-COVID it wasn't happening. But I also knew that this is my 50th year, so 15 July. It's a big motivator.
You don't look 50.
Well, it's one of those which I promised myself that I want to try and hit 50 in the best health that I can. I'm not just talking about cosmetically, but just overall. I mean, it's irrelevant to me, what the external looks like. If, for instance, I'm battling, 2 chronic illnesses or whatever. So I'm doing a number of things to try and get into that ideal health optimization as well. But that was the motivator, and that's basically the minute I realised that I was going down a destructive path again. It didn't take long for me just to snap out of it.
Yeah, brilliant. How have you managed? You said you've been suffering for years with your blood glucose management.
Yeah.
How has that evolved over the last couple of years?
No, it's actually interestingly, it wasn't years. It was actually post-COVID.
Okay.
So
yes, this was a symptom, not a symptom, but an effect.
It was an effect, yeah. So I know for a fact that I had no form of diabetes before COVID because I had a insurance medical, which showed everything was fine. And then, just after the photo shoot, interestingly, I just noticed that sometimes I was feeling a little bit lightheaded, or just wasn't feeling right. Cut a long story short, I took some blood tests and found that my blood sugars are very high. Certainly, what we call impaired glucose tolerance, so sort of like an intermediate stage between normal and diabetes. So I have a very strong family history of that. Started monitoring it, as you can see, and still monitoring it now. What I found is that as long as I pay careful attention to the structure of my diet, I've managed to get excellent control just purely with lifestyle. So managed to stay off all medications and whatever. But it's interesting. We're in that era now of monitoring devices and wearables. And I think you'll find more and more people wearing these type of gadgets, not just people with diabetes, but even sportsmen and athletes and people who are just invested in their own health, because there's no doubt about it, to me as a doctor, glucose is a silent killer, and high glucose and high insulin as a result are probably the hallmarks of a lot of the disease states that we end up in.
And what's interesting about that is I think you found out after your photo shoot what would have happened if you hadn't gone through that body transformation.
I know, it's really, really interesting. I mean, the best I felt was just after the photo shoot, as you know, in the lead up to it when you're in the grind. I mean, I have to be honest, I'm one of those weird people who bizarrely really enjoyed the grind. I think I enjoyed. You enjoy it as well, right? Yeah. I think it's the masochist in me, in that when you're doing something quite extreme. I can't remember the exact figures, but I think I was on about 950 to 1,000 calories, but working out as hard as I can. I was doing pretty long cardio sessions, 40 to 60 minutes, and 25,000 steps a day. Or
Definitely, I was looking at there.
yeah, or 20,000, but I needed to. You know, I think my coach had the right idea.
Well, given that you told me just before we got on air, you did a what did you do, what running challenges did you do last weekend?
Yeah, so last weekend I did something called the 4x4x48. So it's 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. But you know, something like that is not really compatible with. It's not the kind of thing that you want to train for all the time, and you don't something you want to do all the time, because you know it's just puts a big strain on the body. But I did it because for me it's a much more of a mental challenge than physical.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, you need to be in some degree of physical shape to do it, but the mental is far more challenging.
I raise it because it just shows you the masochists are hard, right?
Exactly.
You thrive off that. How hard can I push myself? And the biggest challenge you probably face, as I do, as a type A personality, is like, how can I rest?
Yes.
Like, what is the idea of rest? One of the coaches on the team, Ivan, said to me, you know, I'm preparing now, and I said to him, I'm gonna go harder. And he goes, more is not better. Better is better.
Yes.
And I thought, in my head, that's like against all my instincts, and I know it's right, and I'm trusting that. And for the first time, I'm doing it in a way that's not, let's just do 20,000 steps a day. Let's not do as hard as we can. And it's funny that the results can also be better the other way. But
Totally.
it's just our mentality of, how hard can we go? How many hours can we do? How many clients can we see in a day? As you probably do as well, right?
You got it. And actually, my realization of how wrong that has been for me has only been a very recent revelation, because everything you just said, it describes me to a T.
Yeah.
To me, I always thought that any feat was a marker of bravado. So, you know, hey, I can manage on 3 hours sleep. I only got 2 hours sleep last night. I pulled an all-nighter. I did this, I did that. And increasingly, I'm just understanding the real importance of just good quality sleep. And actually, I now prioritize sleep over absolutely everything. So, you know, and it almost kind of becomes a matter of stress if I don't get good sleep. And of course, it's a vicious circle. I'm not a good sleeper, and I'm trying a lot of things to improve my sleep quality. You know, to get one of these Oura rings, just so
You're fully gadgeted out.
I'm fully gadgeted out. Yeah. I mean, the next time you see me, I might even have an implantable chip in. You know, speaking to a guy who says, you know, that his company makes them.
Oh,
so
really?
you can have it put inside you.
What's the one on your tricep then?
So this is a glucose monitor. So it's a
Okay.
CGM, so continuous glucose monitor. So essentially, I haven't got my phone with me, but essentially there's an app on the phone. You just hold it over, and it'll just measure your blood glucose. So it's a lot of diabetic patients have it so they can avoid the finger prick testing. But the same company that makes it for diabetic patients also makes it for athletes. So it's the same chip, but it's just got a different branding. So the Freestyle Libre is for diabetic patients, but the Super Sapiens is for athletes.
Yeah.
I think it does have a place. I mean, not everyone is going to use it. It can be a little bit expensive to keep using it. But even if people just use it for the short term, to understand how their bodies react to different food loads, it can be really useful. You find that if you wear it long enough, you find that some foods really cause massive glucose spikes, whereas others don't at all.
What have you found?
So I've been experimenting a lot recently with different eating patterns, because one of my big focuses now is also longevity. You know, big sort of student and experiment of longevity medicine. The idea that, you know, there are scientists out there who believe that the person who's going to live to 150 years has already been born. So, you know, somebody is going to make it to 150. And there's certain things that help along that way. So I've been experimenting with things like keto diets and intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. And, you know, before a lot of people bite my head off, I don't believe there's any magic in any of these things. I completely understand that, you know, you achieve weight loss and fat loss with calorie restriction ultimately, and that's how they work. But they work in different ways. So for instance, what I found is if I eat a set number of calories, but throughout the day with a mixture of carbohydrate, in fact, my blood sugar is literally like a range of mountains. It's just up, down, up, down. I feel sluggish, I feel sleepy. My team will often find me, you know, slouched over my desk, half asleep. If I do a keto, I just get a steady flat line on the glucose, which you'd expect because you're not really, you know, putting that glucose load in. And the intermittent fasting, very similar. So for someone who wants to keep their blood sugar down, I find those two things pretty useful. But what was a real game changer for me is the mental state. You know, when I'm doing either a fast with a time restricted eating thing or a bit of keto, I find that my mental clarity, focus, concentration is through the roof. Like my energy is double or triple what it normally is. I can multitask more efficiently. So it's just experimentation at the moment. Having this monitor kind of just allows me to track it.
Well, the bigger lesson there is experimenting.
Yeah.
Once people get past the position where they've done a photo shoot, they've got into incredible shape.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, well, what really works for me and long term? Because that does take a lot of experimentation and trial and error. Like for myself, I played around with intermittent fasting in 2018, and I found that I've not got back since.
Yeah.
For the last 4 or 5 years, I don't have breakfast till 12 o'clock every day, and I typically have 3 meals a day, and for me it works perfectly.
Yeah.
I just couldn't, for me my productivity is through the roof, my energy is really high, and it helps me manage my hunger.
That's it.
And whether it makes a difference, someone else might love 6 meals a day, but it's just about finding what works for you. And I think that's a key lesson here to take away for anyone listening is you've got to keep experimenting until you find something that locks you in, and then you just run with it.
That's it. It's also understanding it's not magic.
No.
There are people who talk about the miracle of intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting, it's going to work if you still stick to basic maths principles. I mean, it's not like you can eat 8,000 calories in your eating window and it's still going to work. But exactly what you said. And because we were brought up with certain mantras, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and you've got to eat, when I did listen to a few sort of gym bros back in the day, and they were like, no, you've got to have 6 meals a day and this and whatever. I couldn't do that. To have 6 meals a day would stress me out. I can't really even do 3, but when I do 2, I'm really good on that. And having that fasting window with a quite short eating window, it just suits me. It's not going to suit everybody. There's some people who'll think that's something I can't do, but as you said, it's experimenting and finding what works.
What did you find out about the blood glucose in the end? Is it why it happened?
Look, I think I spoke to a professor at King's Hospital, and there is a theory that more people are presenting post COVID. People who've had COVID with new onset diabetes. We don't know if that's just because we're looking for it more. In my case, I don't know. There is a strong family tendency to it. But it's interesting that I didn't show any signs of it until I had the infection. Is it immune mediated? I don't know. But I didn't worry too much about why I had it. My important thing was that I need to just make sure that I keep my blood glucose low. And, it really also depends on who you speak to. Because if you speak to a conventional diabetologist, somebody will say, well, as long as you're below, for argument's sake, 6, you're within a normal range. But the way I look at it is, surely it's better to be closer to 4 or 5 than it is to 6. Because if we say that, let's say above 6.5 is bad control, or just being under 6 is not necessarily great control, especially when you're fit and young and trying to be healthy. So I don't know why it happened, but I found that there's a number of things that I can do to manipulate it, to keep it under good control.
What's some of the biggest lifestyle lessons you've learned since your photo shoot?
So many to list, but in no particular order. The first is, in the same way that a great day in the gym doesn't build you the body of your dreams, one bad day is not going to do well you either. So, if you have a bad day when you don't get to exercise, or you go and you have a bit of a blowout that you weren't planning to, just don't worry about it. But just don't make that one day into 2 and 2 days into 4 and 4 days into a week. Own it, enjoy it if you have to, and then just get back on track. So basically being kind to yourself, I think, is the first thing. My coach told me the only bad workout was the one that didn't happen, unless you're sick. So I know there were times when I wanted an hour, but I was running late, I only have 20 minutes, let's still go in and do something. And the psychological impact of that was really, really important, that it allowed me to maintain the continuity. I found where possible, exercising on a Monday was useful, because it was this making sure that you start the week right. For me, the week starts on a Monday. So making sure that I always got my Monday workout was really, really useful. A couple of weeks where I didn't do it, I just found the week didn't go as well for me. I read something on social media which says that, don't get the idea that somebody else's idea of fun has to be yours. I mean, don't get me wrong, when I was younger, I thoroughly enjoyed going out, parties, clubs, everything. I just don't enjoy it anymore. I genuinely don't. I find it a little tedious, if I'm honest. And that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it once in a while, but I can't do heavy nights anymore. I'm not as productive the next day. I'm sluggish, and I don't ever look back and think that was worth it.
Yeah.
So actually overcoming that. Now, if you enjoy it and that's something you love doing, that's a different story. But it's working out what is your ideal life and sticking to it and not worrying too much about what society says about that. The importance of planning. I mean, good Lord, there were days when I would be really on the ball, really focused, make sure that all the prep had been done and all the planning, but all it would take is for me to have forgotten that I needed to put my order in, my protein powders or something, and when that doesn't come in, you start getting a little bit anxious because you haven't got your things. And then you just take a breath and say, it's not the end of the world, I'll manage and we'll get it tomorrow. Enjoying it, I mean, it's just no point doing it. You're not going to really do it if you're not enjoying it. So I made my walks, I told you I was walking to work and walking home. I used that time as productively as I could initially. And I think this was the advice from somebody else. It's listen to a podcast when you do your walk. It was really great advice. I really thank the person who said that, because what's happening is not only are you getting the steps in, but you're getting so many useful nuggets that will really help you, motivate you, whatever. I think I listened to like 20 podcasts in a row, and each one was just a little bit different from the previous one, and there were some absolutely fantastic ones, and people talking about the importance of tracking, people talking about the importance of listening to your coach, and not over questioning and not over analysing, preparing for the photo shoot, but also preparing for the time afterwards, and and all the rebound and all that sort of stuff. So once I listened to the podcast, then I started learning Italian. That was a sensible use of time. Get an audio book, and a month later I was able to speak a few sentences, which was nice. So, but you notice that after a while, as you get the gains, you feel a bit more confident, you're getting better at the exercises, it becomes part of the routine, and you just start to enjoy it more, and you see all your friends doing the same thing. It's a really nice position to be in.
So you're on the podcast now, you're speaking to someone potentially at the early stages of their journey. What are some of the key advice that you'd give them?
It's a great one. I often thought about this, that if I finished my transformation, what would I say? I think the first thing I'd say is, if I can do it, literally anyone can. I mean, I don't see that I possess any particular genetically endowed physique or anything like that made this any easy for me. And therefore I would like to instill that same belief that my first coach gave to me, that anybody can do it. Number two, I think you must just listen to your coach's advice. I was one of those people that, I think you have a phrase, paralysis by analysis, right? And it describes me to a detail where I would really sit there and wonder, well, am I better doing my cardio before my weights, or my weights before my cardio? Is high intensity cardio better than low intensity? Should I do 20 minutes or 40 minutes? Am I better off doing 8 reps or 12? And after a while it was, shut up, just do it. Whatever it is, do it. But do what your coach tells you to do. And sometimes I'd research, is creatinine monohydrate better than this? And, should I take this loading dose? And you can dive so deep into it. But often people who do that, and I'm using myself as an example, I'm diving that deep into it, but I'm just not even doing the basics at the same time. And there are other people who don't question it so much, but they just do as they're told. And that mentality, I think, the coaches are there to give their professional opinions, and that's why we're, assigned. So I would say don't overthink it. Definitely try and lock in some accountability. It's a really important tool, because even when I did my 4x4x48 recently, if I had my accountability then was telling my Facebook and Instagram following that I was doing it. Once I made that decision, I could not go back on it, because I would not be able to handle the, not humiliation, but letting people down.
Of course. And
secondly, I did it for charity. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to tell people right at the beginning, but you should have some form of accountability, and reward, I think, is really important as well. Whether that's a holiday, whether that's a new wardrobe, because you're definitely going to need one, right? Whether it's something, celebrating the small successes, and realizing that it is a journey. I mean, probably the biggest mistake I made is I got to the photo shoot. I was so happy with myself, and I knew that I had to not go crazy afterwards. But after about 4 months, when my next set of problems kicked in, some personal problems, some work-related problems, all the things came together, I came off the rails again a little bit. But what I found is that insight is really important, and when you notice that you're doing it, you've got to put in a friction block to stop it getting any worse. And for me, typically that would be the way I did it is I just found somebody in the gym to train with. If you go on your own, it's so easy just to not turn up. But if you're meeting someone at 6:30, you can't let that other person down. So
just finding all these hacks, isn't it?
Hacks. That's it.
Keep you along the way until it becomes a crystallized lifestyle solution.
That's it. You got it.
So Tapan, how's the physical being a vehicle for you?
Gosh, I'm looking back now on a life of always chasing challenges. I mean, the other thing about me is you mentioned the whole thing about the type A. So I like to set challenges, I like to work hard, and I like to relish the accomplishment in achieving them. But I think, when it was just either academic, or whether it was business, or whether it was in my profession, that was one thing. But actually managing to get it in the physical has actually made me even more resilient in all the other forms of my life as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are just certain habits which I think are synergistic. So when I'm training and I'm eating better, there's no doubt that my productivity improves. When I'm sleeping better, there's no doubt that my productivity improves. When I'm looking after myself in terms of all-round activities, there's no doubt that productivity is fundamentally the driver for pretty much everything we do. So, I mean, I haven't had a chance in the podcast to, thank you personally and, all your team at RNT, because I think it's just absolutely fantastic. But I would not be exaggerating to say that if I look back on my life, the time that I've had with RNT will probably be the single best, not the biggest, but the single best investment that I've made for my health and my future, and that's the other message I'd give to anyone, that, if there's one thing you can do for yourself, one thing you can do for your family, one thing you can do for your future generations, is just to look after yourself, look after that body. It will take great care of you if you allow it to, but just don't take it for granted. And that's basically me in a nutshell.
Amazing. You're 50 years young this year.
50 years young this year.
What's next?
Do you know, I actually do feel that. I do feel 50 years young. And I actually now feel there are probably things out there. Look, I'm not going to do something just to be a sensationalist. I'm not going to do anything just to prove a point. I'm not one of those people who want to say, hey, look, I'm 50 and I can, it's not that, but it's for myself. I want to see, what can I do? Before I did the 4x4x48 this year and last year, I'd never run a marathon. I think I'd done a half, and even that I struggled. So the idea of doing pretty much 2 marathons in a weekend is what it amounts to. Someone told me I'd be doing it, I thought they were mad. And I don't think it necessarily just has to be an endurance thing, but I do want to find things that I feel will just push me in the right way. I think we both used the word before about balance. I certainly don't want to push myself to a point where I'm running myself into the ground. I don't want to be, not enjoying it. But I look at some of these really inspirational people out there. I mean, David Goggins is the inspiration for the 4x4. There's a guy, Rich? He's the guy that does the ultra marathons, whatever. His name's just skipped me for a second. But all these guys who often they discovered their best selves after 40 or 45 or 50, whatever. His book is called Finding Ultra. Yeah. And this is a guy that now runs ultra marathons and whatever. That may not be what I want to do, but the one thing that I refuse to do now is to use age as an excuse. I mean, there's no doubt I'm in better shape and better physical fitness now than I was at 18, and that just shows me how much time I wasted, in getting here. But I'm not going to look back on that. That's spilt milk. But looking to the future, I want to see just what can be done and what can be achieved, and hopefully just serve as mutual inspiration for people around me. Because I've been so inspired by so many people I've seen. Not just you guys, but all the people you've trained. I can't remember all the names, but so many people who've undergone that journey, and they have served to inspire so many people around them. And I hope I can be part of that crew as well.
Amazing. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and I appreciate all the honesty in this journey.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.